Hey everyone, welcome back. We're glad you're here. And today we have a special guest. His name is Tyler Jones. So first off, welcome, Bill. Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Hello.
Hi, nice to see you got off the mountain and you're back down. Bill was in Sholo last week, and we got to see one of his little kids pop in. Was it Billy who came by and said hi?
That was Elliot,
It was
actually.
Elliot who came in. Okay. And then we have Tyler Jones is here. Now, I asked Tyler to come on because Tyler's got a unique business. Well, unique in that as a real estate agent and a lender, we don't typically talk about what it's like when we work with our wholesale flipper investor buyers. And Tyler is one of those folks that I get to work with because when we have products that don't fit the traditional market because there's just too much work that has to be done to it, or there's something challenging about it, we go to people like Tyler and say, hey, look, this is what we have. What kind of offer would you make? So, Tyler, thank you so much for being here. Tyler's with Valley Property Group. He's been doing this business for like 3 years. So, he's kind of seasoned in that. And because a lot has changed in 3 years, and I'm sure the learning curve was quite significant for you.
For sure. Very weird time to get into it, and it's a very, very weird time to adjust now, but it's fun. And yeah, there's definitely a lot you learn and a lot more there's so much more you don't know than.
Oh, I'm sure. And I mean, I always joke, like, even after as long as I've been in this business, there's still days where I go, huh, well, that's new. Because, nothing ever stays the same. And
You
that's
learn
basically why I think
something
I've
new.
stayed here this long. My ADHD loves this kind of job because it
Yeah,
changes
yeah.
so often. But so, Tyler, I want to chat a little bit. You're on the acquisition side of Valley Property Group. Now, share with us a little bit about like the types of properties you guys look for. What's your specialty? What is there anything in particular you are really looking for? And then there's things that you're just like, absolutely not. We'll never probably put our hands on this type of product.
Yeah, sure. Good question. I would say that there's a deal to be done on every property if the numbers work. That's number one. With that being said, the properties that tend to work the best are properties where seller expectations would be somewhat aligned with buyer expectations. These kinds of properties are properties that are damaged, hoarded out, very very old and never updated, these sorts of things. Something where any seller, no matter how much they knew or didn't know about real estate, would assume, yeah, my house is probably going to be worth less than a newer, type of construction, and it's probably going to be flipped. It's probably going to be bought by someone who's going to try to update it and flip it. Those are the best ones because it's the easiest conversation for both parties. However, I would say that really any candidate for a flipper to purchase or a wholesaler to get under contract and assign to a flipper is a property that is 20 or more years removed from major cosmetic updates and updates under the hood, such as roof, HVAC, plumbing, these kinds of things that are expensive, because any home that is not updated is less attractive than a home that is newer, more updated, newer built, or whatever the case may be. And in a competitive marketplace to find buyers, yeah, that's
Yeah, because we've had these conversations about some cosmetic stuff is not a big deal, but for buyers right now, if the house isn't dialed in,
mhm.
it's hard because, all right, I probably have to sell my house to get the equity out to buy the next property because I'm giving Bill my money to get the loan. I
Yes,
don't have anywhere to go. I may have like a couple of kids and now I got to live in a construction zone. And that's just not appealing to me as a buyer, right? Like that's not where my head is. I
right.
want to go in there. I want it to be as turnkey as possible where I don't have to really do anything. Maybe I'll paint. That's not a big deal.
Mhm.
Flooring, I probably don't really want to do. Cabinets and all that. That's just too much for me.
For sure. And it could be in a certain state of the market. It could be that someone is totally fine living in a home as long as it's a home, even if it hasn't been updated in 20 years, but it's fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
unfor-
I have a house that's built in 19, that's 83, it's original 83 everything. And I kind of marketed it that way as a rental property. The people who live in there have like an 85 Westphalia van. Like that's their vibe.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
they fit that product. That's who likes it, right?
Retro.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, and that's it. And so sometimes you
Yeah,
may have a person who's just like, don't touch a thing. I want to live here. But realistically, as a seller, you're not going to get top dollar for that property if it's in that condition and you're looking to sell to a traditional buyer. So I think sometimes sellers have to understand the investor buyer may be your best option for getting something done quickly, right? Because we could sit on the market quite a while
right.
if it's completely, the condition is the way it is. I see these a lot in like probate deals, right? Where I'm getting a property because someone passed away. And the heir maybe most likely doesn't even live in the state, doesn't really want to deal with a lot of stuff. So I'm calling you
Right.
guys to say, hey, look, this is kind of where we are.
Hmm.
Now, do you have a particular formula? Like, are you looking to say, because I once had an investor tell me, well, we're looking to typically get like 30 cents on the dollar or so. Is there, or are you guys just running numbers independently each property because, based on area? Like, how does it usually work for you on what makes a good sense for you to buy a property?
Easy enough. You start by finding an after repair value. You're looking for something that is as close to the square footage as possible and as close to the same year build as possible in the same subdivision without crossing any major roads, that in the last ideally 6 but sometimes 12 months has sold and is flipped, that you can kind of use to set a baseline for, okay, what can I expect to pull out of this property once I have it completely remodeled. And you're also looking for example, if my property doesn't have a pool and this other property does have a pool, that's obviously a more one of those is more of an attractive asset to the buyer than, but whatever, you can make those
Mhm.
kinds of adjustments. So you start there, and then you just work backwards. Okay, it's 1,700 square feet. What's it going to cost? It's needs a roof and needs floors, needs a new kitchen, needs new bathrooms. It's probably about $50 a square foot. So we're looking at 85K, budget in another 10 for any random things that might happen. Call it 95K. Factor in, if you're taking a hard money loan, you're probably paying, if it's a 12% loan, 12% APR, you're paying about 1% a month on 80% of your purchase price. So you can be about, let's say if you get a $350,000 loan, 12% annualized, about 1% a month. So you're paying $3,500 a month on your hard money holding costs over 4 or 5 months. That puts you at 17, 18K. And then commissions on the back end that you're going to pay to both realtors when you sell the property. Usually budget that around 5%.
Mm-hmm.
So you take all of that and then you say, okay, how can I get either, at least this is what I like to do. I know a lot of other guys in the business that have a number that they're trying to get out, a target profit. I'm always trying to make 40K. I'm always trying to make 70K, whatever. I like to say I'll figure out 10% cash on cash or 45 grand, whichever one's higher. And whichever
Okay.
one of those is higher, that's what I'm shooting for. So you add up that 45K plus your repair costs, plus your holding costs, plus your commissions on your ARV, and subtract all of that from your ARV, and that's the price that you got to buy the house at.
Okay, so and that's probably more from the flipping perspective, right? What about a wholesale perspective? Would that be
Wholesale, same exact thing. Just
yeah?
subtract however much money you would want to make on a wholesale fee. Um,
Okay.
just
And then
subtract, whatever, 10K.
now the contractors you're working with, if you're on the flip side of things, are these people that are employed by you? Do you have a company that like splits profit with you? How does like I've seen it done, but I know I personally have done it several different ways. Like I've split profit with a contractor. We've done different things. So I'm gonna assume it's done a bunch of. Is there anything common or typical?
Uh, Guys with my size shop or smaller are shopping it out to contractors and buying the materials as needed. Bigger shops have their own guys and oftentimes a warehouse full of materials that they've accumulated over time, auctions, clearance sales, things like that. It varies on it varies. Someone like me in my position, I would probably need to buy a home a little bit more conservatively than somebody who had a big shop, could work on tighter margins, and also is able to save on the cost of labor and materials through accumulation over time and having their own guys employed, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say that there's a decent mix of both those kinds of investor buyers in this market, and sometimes it really all just depends because my ARV is not the same as somebody else's ARV. They might look at it a little bit differently. They might be okay crossing certain streets and looking at a house on that side of the street versus this side. And it all is about whatever number you start with to work backwards from.
And I
So
would think that number you kind of have to, and I personally would think you go from like, okay, if the end goal is to sell it to a consumer, how will like when Bill sends out an appraiser for a job, how do they comp a property?
Mhm.
Because if they're not going to use that same number you used that
Right.
crossed a big street or was in a very different neighborhood,
Yep.
how do you get that value yourself then, right? So I would assume you have to kind of be cautious about that part.
For sure. You can never assume you're going to set a record on price in a
Right.
neighborhood. You never can. Even if the high comp, there's two high comps that are both 500,000 flipped and they're both 1,200 square feet, and you've got 1,700 square feet and a pool, obviously, and it's right next door. That's obviously a better house, but you can't bank on. You could maybe adjust it a little bit because that's an extreme example of something that's clearly better than something else. But in general, just you can't bank on setting a record. And if you try to do that for your own purposes, you will probably lose money. And if you try to do that as a wholesale deal, everybody who does these that has experience actually doing the flips is going to laugh at you, which is also not very good for business. So
Well, and I think also there's two numbers in the end, right? There's the appraised value and then the purchase. What?
You had several twos there. You were doing this way.
Whatever. So there's two things. There's the appraised value, which you hit on, right? And then there's what the house will actually sell for.
Right.
I think is what you battle a little bit too, right? So like it's great. You can get comps. Like, I mean, especially when market was kind of correcting a little bit, the appraisals were coming in higher, right, than the purchase price. But that doesn't mean that's what someone's gonna actually buy it for, right? So I think you're balancing that fine line when you're doing that. And I work with a lot of wholesalers and flippers as well that are looking to actually sometimes build their portfolio to find the right house, right? To where you talked about hard money a little bit, and I know before we talked about you being able to do hard money, correct?
yeah, I broker some hard money loans here and there. Yeah, work with a few different lenders.
And so one thing that some investors do, even wholesalers, they'll take a hard money loan out with money to renovate and then immediately do a refinance to add it to their portfolio because they have that instant equity. So we do a lot of those as long as it stays in the conventional world to add it to their portfolio. But it's a great opportunity where you got to run those numbers, make sure it works, right? And then make sure the appraised value comes in when you're playing with that. So now flipping is a very intriguing opportunity out there, but I think you're also looking for not just the right property, the right seller at the same time.
That's the biggest thing. I mean, at the end of the day, you must have someone who's willing to sell it at a number that it works as an investment. Otherwise, it's just it just doesn't work, and that's fine. I mean, for most people, a home is the most expensive thing they'll ever, it's the biggest asset they'll ever own, and they want to protect that value. And if we're in a stage of the market, maybe moving in a direction that people aren't loving as much, they might be a little less willing to sell at that price and wait for it to turn back up. And it's a decision that everyone makes. But yeah, to your point, it's really about finding the seller and the agent who is willing to give their seller good advice, which is also really, really important. That's 90% of it, honestly, I think.
Now, if anyone in our audience is interested in like learning more about the wholesale, or they would like to know when you have acquired a property, is that something they could do to reach out to you to say, hey, look, put me on your list. If you come up with something, I'd be interested. Like, I want to get into this. I kind of want to do, like, would that be a connection you would want to make, or what would be a good connection for you?
Yeah, I would say that I'm a little less interested in doing the wholesale stuff right now. I mean, I'll do it if
it makes sense.
If it makes sense to do it. There's more money in a flip if you can make a 5 or 10 grand fee on a wholesale deal, and that's great. Or you could find the right property and you could make 80 grand 5 months from now, and it's like, which one is, you know what I mean? So
yeah, because the wholesale is gonna be a very short term, like that's a quick turnaround. Where
correct.
the other part, and it's a little less, the flip side is few more unknowns, right? Like you get into a property, you base what you know on what you can see because you're not allowed to dig deep into a property, and then you start pulling walls down or doing something, you find something wrong, that can completely, so depends, I guess, on your risk adversity level.
Yeah, for sure. But to your question, yeah, I do get plenty of opportunities to get homes under contract. If somebody is interested in purchasing a flip for themselves, or even just learning more about the flip space, or if they're in the flip space and want some hard money, I'm happy to help with that. I know Bill does lending too, so maybe we're competing interest on that a bit. But yeah, they can.
I don't think Bill does hard money.
Well, sure, but if somebody does,
there's fix and flips products, but hard money that's your world. I'll take the refinance afterwards, or help
Yeah.
out, get into the conventional world afterwards.
Will doesn't know anything about hard money, guys. I'm the only one, so no.
Well,
But
and the thing that's beautiful about our industry is there's always so many different pieces and aspects, right? Like you have something that I obviously wouldn't do. I would, I could sell a property someone wants to sell to an investor. I can help sell something that somebody wants to after they've flipped it and want to sell it. But I'm never going to take the buyer who wants to go looking for that property, right? Like
Mhm.
that's not really my wheelhouse. It's just,
No. And
I'm much better at the other stuff.
there's
So,
plenty of me out there who are aggressively seeking out those properties because there's profit in it. And when there is an incentive like profit in that, there's going to be plenty of people that flock
yeah,
to,
and I'll be honest,
you
for
know.
me, there are quite a few of the wholesalers, investors I bumped into, I will never work with again because their personalities are terrible. Like I've had condescending, I've had rude, I've had arrogant, and I'm like, you know what? Here's the deal. I don't have to work with you. If I explain to my client how it's a challenge to work with a particular person and
Mhm.
how people don't want the extra stress. Granted, they usually have me dealing with it, but I'll explain to them it's not as much fun. And it's always about relationships. It's who you connect with. It's the people you know, and it's also being honest with each other, right? Like if I came to you and said, "Hey, this is a property," you're like, "Girl, you're never going to get those prices. Like nobody in their right mind would pay that. If they do, they're probably going to renegotiate you during the inspection period for another." So, which happens often. But
And that's a common trick. I mean, if
oh
I,
yeah, for sure.
it's, and that's the wholesaler special, I think, and especially in this market, is you have a lot of guys who say, yeah, sure, oh, 280, yeah, you want, yeah, whatever, I can do 280, and realistically it's 220, and then they wait till the last day of inspection when the seller's back is up against the wall, and
Yeah.
and do that. And I know that totally, I mean, it totally ruins, it ruins the whole market for everyone, for the
It
realtor,
does.
for the sellers,
Yeah.
for the
Well, and
competing
that's why my
investors.
list of investors has gotten shorter.
Yeah.
Because I educate a seller as to what can happen, but and then on the for when you guys have the completed product, you get this beautiful flip, and then on the lending side, Bill, I know that there's some limitations for people when they go to buy a flip if they're going to use a particular loan. You can't do what FHA. Can you do
Yeah, well, they can. It's just a matter of when was the acquisition date, right?
acquisition date or the date it went on the market?
No, acquisition date
Right,
of the
acquisition
property
date. Okay.
originally.
All right.
So if the investor flipper bought it, within 90 days, that's a no-go with FHA. Right. And it's from the point at when we pulled the case number also. So it doesn't matter when you can get on the contract, they pull the case number a few days later if it's outside the 90 days.
Yeah.
But when you get into FHA, even between that 90 to 180 days, there's the potential that FHA will call for a second appraisal to verify.
Gotcha. Oh,
Right. So that's why a lot of the flipping properties, similar to condos also, right? We go more the conventional route,
mhm.
for the most part. But honestly, how the market's sitting nowadays, right? A lot of the time with flipping, correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, they're taking a little bit longer than 90 days to get on the contract. So I think
Yes.
it's just a matter of having a great realtor, great lender, great investor in your pocket to make sure that on your team that they're looking out for you, that you don't run into the snag later on. Last thing you want is to be absolutely in love with a house that's a flip, right? That looks pretty, it's been done up, but you can't close on it FHA because of one of these rules, right? Just being prepared for that. And I think it's there just to protect the buyers a little bit. That's the whole point of the FHA loan.
That's true.
Yeah,
Well,
it's really important too to have a lender that similar in all of these types of markets. Everyone who sits in our chairs, we're obviously trying to help. We're trying to help sellers get their homes sold. We're trying to get loans done for people, but we're also protecting our own interests. And when you're protecting your own interests in a market that is a little bit more challenging, you do have a lot of people that will tell potential clients what they want to hear just to get in the door. And so it's really important to find a realtor, find a lender who are not going to tell you what you want to hear, but tell you exactly baseline where you need to be in order to do what you're trying to do. And if you don't like the answer, you don't like the answer, but you need to know it.
Yeah.
right.
Oh,
And
I have those
again,
conversations all the time.
and this is why these relationships are so important, right? It's
Totally.
every single person involved. When everybody just understands and is educated as to where things really are, it makes everything go so much better. And then you don't usually get yelled at the end of the day, which is usually how I like to end my day.
Prefer
Yelled
that.
at.
Yeah.
I don't like those days where I get yelled at. It's not fun. Well, Tyler, I so appreciate you being on today. It was really fun getting to learn more about this side of the business, which, I know when I have clients who have, these challenging properties, I tell them, like, look, I'm going to put it on the MLS, but first I'm going to go to my investors and I'm going to see kind of where they are. If this makes sense for you, we're going to take it, we'll go forward.
Yep.
I say, but because I tell them these are the folks I've worked with that I've had success with. Right. And that's kind of the way at the end of the day, when you're talking about who's going to renegotiate me in the middle of a contract because they think that you're stuck somewhere as a seller.
Right.
I want someone to be honest up front. This may not be the highest we have right now, but this is the one that's going to probably go through at this price.
For sure. And also too, they're not even doing it to leverage the seller. They're just doing it a lot of times because they just need something and then they're just going to pray.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's a problem. And then you also run into issues with certain people who, I mean, we can get into this all day, but people who, they're under contract and therefore they can argue that they have a tangible interest in the property. So they put a clout on title and then they hold the clout on title hostage to make the seller pay. And it's just, it can get really scummy when you're in these kinds of waters where the market is more challenging. It's really, really important to work with people that are not going to cause you, but literally potentially like multi tens of thousands of dollar problems.
Yeah. That's a good conversation we should have Patrick McQueen from Ellis Legal on for next week to kind of chat about when you pick the wrong investor partner, potentially having that Liz Pendens that gets added to your title that they prevent you, or sometimes especially if you don't have realtor representation or somebody who can watch out for your best interest, sometimes you have an investor who will slide a piece of paper that says sign this document and basically hold that seller hostage on the property for a period of time.
Absolutely.
So it's important that you work with people who have good reputations. And so, Tyler, I so appreciate you being here, and I know Bill and I are really grateful that you came on.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions about wholesaling, flipping, Tyler's a great resource. I'll put his contact information in the chat. And Bill, thanks again for being here today. It's always fun to chat every week with you, because I was telling Tyler, we were talking this morning, the market is what the market is right now, right? We haven't really changed much again. And Tyler's like, hey, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a good thing. But when we're doing what we do, it doesn't give us a ton of content.
So we bring guests on.
So we bring people we love.
Yeah.
So you guys have a great week. Talk to you soon.
Bye, guys.